Once you understand the capabilities Bubble gives you for your app, plus some of the limitations or workarounds you might have depending on your app, the next step involved in building a solid foundation and putting down roots is knowing which seeds to plant. Or in other words, setting out your square one framework that'll allow you to logically move on to squares 2, 3, 4, and so on, instead of skipping ahead to square 10 and missing the most critical steps of this process altogether. When I say plant the seeds of your app, I mean you need to know exactly which features your app should have from the very start. If you're familiar with the startup world, you might know what an MVP is, a minimum viable product. And it's okay if you don't, because that's why you're here. An MVP is essentially the most stripped down version of your product. So you might want to build a full job platform that has 20 different features, but the MVP of that app might just be a simple function that lets users post and apply for jobs. It leaves out features like saving favorites, verifying on social media, or sharing jobs via email, for example. The point of an MVP is to validate an idea or have a working product you can test with your market or pitch to investors. Now, to be clear, this lesson isn't actually about MVPs, but regardless of whether or not you're following that methodology with your app, it's a framework you should start with in development too. So when you go to plant the seeds of your app, I want you to figure out the most critical functionality your app needs from the very start. An easy way to think about it is like this. What features will your app not exist without? Remember, the point of this step is to figure out where to start with your development. So what features makes up the absolute core of your app, where if you didn't have them, you just wouldn't have an app at all? For the job board app example, the core features are posting and applying for jobs, because none of the other features matter if you can't do those things. If you're not quite sure which features are must-haves right from the start, there's a method I want you to follow to figure it out. It's called the Moscow Matrix. Moscow is an acronym that stands for must-haves, should have, could have, and won't have, at least for now. And in this case, we're going to use each letter in that acronym to decide which features to start building first. Let's break it down step by step. Not surprisingly, we're looking for your must-have features when deciding where to start with development. Must-have features are critical to forming the solid base of your app. Without them, you simply don't have an app. Here's another example to add to our job board one. If your goal is to help real estate brokers keep track of listings, a must-have might be a home listing aggregation feature. Or if your goal is to help doctors' offices schedule appointments, a must-have would be a calendar booking feature. Again, you might have thought up dozens of other features for each of those example app ideas, but not all of them will be must-haves. Then you have your should-haves. Should-haves are still important, and after your must-haves are built, these will likely turn into your must-haves. For the purpose of planting the right seeds to form the roots of your app, should-haves aren't critical. They're not time-sensitive. Going back to the doctor's appointment example, a should-have might be a feature that checks patients' insurance, something your app idea involves, but maybe not something that's absolutely necessary for your app to function at the core. Should-haves are features and functionalities just as important as your must-haves, but not as time-sensitive. Next are your could-haves. Here's where we find a clear separation. Could-have features could improve user experience or make the overall app better, but they're not necessary for your app to serve its core purpose. A could-have feature might be a way for patients to compare doctors' offices. Maybe they can choose 3 offices while searching to make an appointment, and then compare those office locations, soonest availability, doctors, and prices. Users might be able to do the same thing by clicking into each individual doctor profile, but having a compare feature would simply make it easier. It's not necessary, but it improves the experience. Could-have features should be saved for later. Once you start getting beta users or early adopters, You can reevaluate your could-haves to gauge need, and then move forward based off hard data. And last, we have your won't-haves. A won't-have is further down on the list than a could-have. It's a feature that would not have an impact in the foreseeable future and would not be worth investing your time in. That said, these features aren't necessarily cut from the feature list altogether, but they don't serve a purpose now, and they might never in the future. Looking back to our appointment scheduling example, a won't-have might be a patient review feature, where patients could review doctor's offices they've used in order to help future users choose an office. This feature might be a won't-have because for the purposes of building the foundation of your app, you likely won't have enough users to aggregate any helpful reviews. However, that feature doesn't necessarily have to be canned altogether. It can be reviewed again once the user base reaches a certain level. Using the Moscow matrix, you can go through your entire idea, all the features and functionality you've come up with, and then strip it down to the absolute most necessary core to start developing right away. Okay, so now's the time to go ahead and stop moving through these steps, open up a text doc or take out a pen and paper, and write down the words must have, should have, could have, and won't have. Go through every single feature you want your app to have and categorize them accordingly. Once you've done that, you can keep moving forward. The next thing we're going to talk about, which is an equally important step in this process, is to know what order to build in. Now, I want to start by saying we're not talking about the same thing we went over with the Moscow matrix. I don't mean which order to build your features in, because if you went through the Moscow matrix, you know which order to build them in. I'm talking about actual back-end development.